One night, while visiting a state line establishment, Buford Pusser was beaten, cut up, and robbed. From that night on, the very mention of his name would strike fear in the heart of WO Hathcock. Well, that's what people want you to believe, but the truth is quite different. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Mike Elam, and this is Buford Pusser, the other story. Most of us don't know the true story of William Odell, otherwise known as WO Hathcock. He was born on April 15th of 1929. He attended Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, trained as a watchmaker. And when he came back home to the state line area, I think he realized that the economy there just wouldn't serve him well in that particular trade at that particular time. So he decided to try something different, and having seen the activities at the state line, he went to work for his uncle Jack Hathcock, who owned the State Line Club. Returning home from college and needing a job to support his family, W.O. went to work for his uncle Jack Hathcock at the State Line Club. W.O. soon learned the tricks of the trade about buying and selling bootleg whiskey. It was a real moneymaker, so much so that W.O. had ambitions of opening his own roadhouse. At this point in time, he purchased the property almost directly across the highway from the State Line Club. This infuriated Jack, as his nephew that he had trained would become his competitor. He soon moved a small travel trailer onto the lot, where he, his wife Larice, and son Dennis lived. He made his living selling bootleg whiskey. Hathcock soon started construction of the Plantation Club, and before long it was completed. Here is a photo of W.O. and his infant son Dennis in front of the plantation. In this photo, you can see the Plantation Club across busy Highway 45 from the dining area of the Shamrock Restaurant. And this is the point where the movie Walking Tall comes into play. You have all sorts of media fan pages about Buford Pusser, and many of the members there consider that movie to be a documentary, which it's not. I mean, the captions say that it is a fictional account of certain events in the life of Buford Pusser, just as it says that any similarities between persons or events in the movie are coincidental. But obviously we know different, because the Plantation Club somehow was morphed into the Lucky Spot, and W.O. was morphed into a character called Buell Jaggers. Here is a very rare photograph of the actual Plantation Club. Now let's compare it to the movie version, The Lucky Spot. Another fallacy we saw in the Walking Tall movie was the casino in The Lucky Spot. Now, when you try to compare The Lucky Spot to the actual Plantation Club, There was no such room in that building. This is a diagram of what the Plantation Club actually was laid out like. In the movie Walking Tall, you'll recall a scene where Buford Pusser was pinned to a table, beaten, cut up, and eventually robbed, thrown out in the rain, and left for dead. This is one of those certain events that Buford claimed was true. According to Buford, this incident occurred in February of 1957. At the time, the average size WO Hathcock was 27 years old. In this particular scene, Buell Jaggers was shown beating Pusser, who was pinned to the table just prior to him being carved up. Help us keep new installments of The Other Story coming by hitting like, comment, share, or subscribe. Did the real story play out as the movie and Buford told us it did? Not at all. We have yet to find a single police report, medical report, or even a newspaper article that verifies Buford's or the movie's story. If you recall, the movie showed Buford in a McNairy County courthouse, ripping off his shirt, baring his chest to show the jurors the scars left behind from the attack, telling the jury, "If you let them do this to me and get away with it, you give the eternal right to do the same damn thing to any one of you." Buford would claim he required 192 stitches to put his wounds back together. Yet here's a photograph taken about 2 years after the incident where he's a wrestler on the Chicago wrestling circuit. If you notice in the photograph, he has no scars. In my book, Buford Pusser, The Other Story, I tell what happened at the state line with Buford Pusser and the state line mob in chronological order. I think it's important that we are able to discern the facts from the myth in this thing. So it's available on Amazon. It's a good read, 254 pages, lots of documents, lots of photographs. Walking Tall showed us how Buford returned to the lucky spot once he had recovered from his wounds. He was there to get back the money that had been stolen from him, along with the money to cover his medical expenses, and of course, money to replace his stolen vehicle. He entered the lucky spot with a big stick. He used the stick to deal out the only form of justice that Buell Jaggers and the state liners would understand. So what is the truth about this part of the story? Well, let's take a look at this news article. This newspaper article, along with FBI files, reveals that Buford Pusser, Jerry Wright, and Marvin King Jr. were all allegedly involved in the robbery of the Lucky Spot. Buford and his two friends were arrested in Chicago and transported back to Alcorn County, Mississippi, not McNairy County, Tennessee, as was shown in the movie Walking Tall. The three were charged with robbery and the attempt to take WO Hathcock's life. The trial was very unlike what we saw in the movie Walking Tall, as both sides presented their witnesses. The prosecution presented their witnesses, including Sheriff Hilly Coleman of Alcorn County. Coleman had been a deputy at the time of the robbery, but had been sworn in as sheriff since. He had seen Buford Pusser and others in the club that night. Some of the other prosecution witnesses included employees of the Plantation Club. They had also seen Pusser and his friends in the club that night. Next, the defense called their witnesses, mostly friends and relatives of the three defendants. Try as they might, the defense witnesses could not account for all of the hours of the defendants the night of the robbery. Unlike what we saw in the movie Walking Tall, Buford didn't stand up, tear his shirt off, exposing his scars to the jury. Instead, he sat there at the defense table and was rather meek. probably because he knew that there was a good chance that he might go to prison. It was a race to the finish in this trial, and bystanders felt like that due to the testimony, the verdict of the jury could go either way. With the trial now hanging in the balance, one of the last defense witnesses to be called was Elmer St. John, personnel manager of the Union Bag Company. St. John would present the three defendants' time cards. The three defendants' time cards reflected that they had each worked their entire shift, which ended just hours before the robbery at the state line. This left them no time to drive from Chicago to the state line, making it impossible for them to have been involved. If you recall, in the movie Walking Tall, after the prosecution and the defense had both presented their cases, Sheriff Al Thurman was talking with the judge when he looked up and told the judge, "The jury's back from deliberation. They've been out for less than 5 minutes." That wasn't reality. Now keep in mind, this first part of the trial was about the robbery charges only. About 6 p.m. in the evening, Judge Jarvis handed the case to the jury. They deliberated for a couple of hours and then took a meal break. Shortly after, they returned to give the judge their verdict. The jury had acquitted all three defendants on the charges of robbery. Now the prosecution team felt that if they couldn't prove that the three had robbed WO Hathcock, how could they ever prove that the three had intended to kill him? The prosecutors now had no choice but to drop the charge of attempted murder against all three defendants. In early 1964, Alcorn County officials decided to cancel the beer permits held by most of the establishments in that county. This included the one held by WO Hathcock. Now, what this means is that when Buford Pusser was elected sheriff and took office in September of 1964, the Plantation Club, which was on the Mississippi side of the border, had been closed for months. So how does Pusser get credit for cleaning up that part of the state line? Sheriff Pusser and his advocates would have us believe that W.O. Hathcock feared the very ground that Buford Pusser walked on. So I have to ask, if this were true, why would he take an interest in purchasing the state line properties that the IRS had seized from the Hathcock estate? W.O. and his business partner, Howard Bunch, made contact with Towhead White, who was still in federal prison. They wanted to know if he wanted a 1/3 interest in the state line properties. White told them that he didn't have any interest in being in that business once he was released, that he had other plans. On July 13, 1966, came yet another shootout at the Shamrock Motel, this one between the owner, W.O. Hathcock, and trespassers Lester Derrick, Hayward King, and Junior Smith. It seems that Smith was interested in some property that lay behind the Shamrock Motel. Several times, Smith had cut a lock off of a gate that blocked a private road that Jack Hathcock had built on that property. On this date, however, things would be different, as first words, then gunfire was exchanged. Hayward King was taken to a local hospital with 25 to 30 pellets embedded in his head and body. Hathcock, the co-owner of the Shamrock, was treated for an ankle wound, while Junior Smith was hit in the right ear. According to this FBI document, about 4 months later, Howard Bunch and W.O. Hathcock put the state line properties up for sale, and they were eventually sold. In spite of all of Buford's claims and boasting that W.O. Hathcock walked in fear when around Buford. There's nothing to indicate that was true. And that's pretty much the end of this story as far as W.O. Hathcock is concerned. I will add that W.O. passed away on May 31st, 2010. He had suffered a fall when he came home from barbershop one day, hit his head on a step outside his home, and never recovered from it. At any rate, that's it for this episode. We'll be back next week with yet another